This is Online Lecture 2, Browsing the Web. First, let's talk about what your typical web page characteristics would be on something that is professionally developed. Now, this is excluding websites that are created by amateur programmers or blogs or other types of sites. We're referring now to professional websites that most companies pay quite a bit of money to have written for them. They will usually have these items you see on your screen: a logo, a menu for site navigation, usually some type of media, pictures, or video, links to related web pages, often advertisements, if particularly if the website is being sponsored by another company, a search tool within the website, connectivity links to social networking such as Facebook or Twitter, links to privacy and security statements often on the bottom of the website, and also a copyright statement. And here's an example of such a website, weather.com. Weather.com has all these elements, including the advertisements. Of course, it's too large to show in a single picture, but as you can see, it has the menu and the ads and the searches and so forth on the site. As far as navigating the internet, some things to know about how the internet is set up and how navigation is actually done by a browser. It involves three basic things: IP addresses, domain names, and URLs. First of all, IP addresses, which you may or may not have heard this term before. Uh, Really, an IP address is the equivalent of the address of your house, for example, or apartment. In order to find a location, you have to have an address, a physical address. And the same in the internet. In order to find a device or a server, you also have to have an internet address or an IP address. There are a couple of different formats in use right now: the older IVP4 and the newer IVP6 are both formats of IP addressing currently in use today. First of all, the IVP4 format is the older of the two. The pattern is a numeric pattern of up to 3 digits, 4 groups of 3 with dots between them. If you've ever set up your own router, you might see that that router has an IP address that follows that pattern. As a matter of fact, the example here is usually the address you'll see for a router you might be setting up, 192.168.1.1, and it's usually referring to a local address in that case. This is called a 32-bit addressing system, so numeric, no letters, 4.3 billion combinations, which seems like a lot, but worldwide that really isn't that many combinations. So the next format has come into use for that reason. The IVP6 format came into being in the late 90s, and it's not completely in use yet. You see both of them used, as you will see in a few examples coming up, but it's an addressing system that is much, much bigger, and it can accommodate a tremendous number of unique addresses. The pattern is 8 sets of numbers or letters, so they're alphanumeric, separated by colons. Instead of 32-bit, it's 128 bits, so 4 times larger, and it's alphanumeric. So instead of just 0 through 9, you have 0 through 9 and A through F as well. This leads to 3.2 times 10 to the 38th combinations, which is just an absolutely huge number. you will never run out of unique addresses with this formatting system. It is possible if you have a PC or laptop to locate your IP address, or as a matter of fact, an IP address of another server or website using your computer. And the next two slides will demonstrate how that is done. So you actually can do this from your command prompt on your PC. You do need to be careful when you're typing into a command prompt of what you're typing. It is possible to damage your system at the command prompt if you type the wrong thing. So if you try this, just keep that in mind. You are able to bring up a Windows command prompt, assuming you have the right setup on your Windows and it's not been disabled. For example, on a school PC, KVCC, you would not be able to do this. But on your own PC, you can. It's under Windows accessories, and you can bring up the command prompt, and it brings up a window. This is actually very similar to the old style DOS system that was in use in the 70s and 80s. And when that comes up, you can type the command ipconfig. You see that on top, and hit the enter key, and that will give you the configuration of that computer. This particular one was done on my home office computer. And if you see down the middle there, there's an IVP4 address, which is the local network in my office. And then there's also an IVP6 format, several of them, including the one on the bottom, which is a much more unique address over a much wider area. So you can see that most devices have both addresses, but they're used in different ways. Also, using the command prompt, you can type another command called tracer T to locate the IP address of a website. In this example, you'll see 3 lines down the command tracer T and then a space www.weather.com. And it takes a few seconds to trace this route. And this top address is actually where it's starting from, again, my office PC, and it's working its way through the internet through various addresses until it actually finds the server where weather.com is run from, which happens to be one called aka technologies.com. So you can see all the jumps that it has to make to find that server using the IP addresses. The next item is domain names. Now that is actually a much more familiar item. Domain name is something you see in the address bar of your browser, usually on the top. And that corresponds to a specific IP address that allows you, just like with that tracer T command that we previously showed you, allows your computer on your browser to find the server that a website is on that you are requesting to view. And there's something called a DNS, or a domain name system. It's a name server that translates that domain name, for example, weather.com, into an IP address like we looked at in the previous slides that the computer can understand. And that's how it locates the other websites. When a website is created, it has to have a registered domain name. And that is right now done through an organization called ICANN, Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers. And once a domain name is registered through them, that becomes the home page. So they're assigning the name to the DNS server so it can be located, and that's the organization that controls that. Other websites under that domain name do not have to be registered, just the top one. So that's called a top level domain. And we'll look at that a little closer now. So the top level domain, or TDL, is actually the .com or the .org portion of the website that you may be looking at. Those are fairly standardized, and these are some examples. These are probably the most original and common ones that you're used to seeing, but there are many, many more now. Being the fact that so many domain names have been registered and used, it's difficult to find a unique name, so more top-level domains have been created to accommodate that. The .com is extremely difficult now to find anything unique on. They're just about all taken, so other top-level domains have been created so you can, again, have more combinations. .orgs are supposed to be for nonprofit organizations, although just about anybody can use them as .coms. .edus are supposed to be reserved for schools. .gov is only for government. .net was meant for major networking centers, but again, just about anyone can register a .net. And again, there are many more of these. And this is just a few examples of domain names: adobe.com, google.com, of course, kvcc.edu, netflix.com, and of course, there's many more. And these are the things that you're actually familiar with. Keeping in mind that when these are registered, that domain name server is what connects them to the actual address on the internet, the IP address. That brings us to the URL, or Uniform Resource Locator, and that is the web address that you're accustomed to seeing on that browser bar, and that allows you to zero in on a specific page. So each URL will ultimately point to a specific IP address so that your computer can find it. So these are the components of a typical URL that you would see in that browser address bar. First of all, the protocol HTTP, TPS, or HTTP. Now, please note that S indicates that it is a secure address. If the S is not present, it's not secure. Now, for the most part, you will always see HTTPS these days. It didn't used to be that way, but now just about everything is on a secure protocol. After the two backslashes, then the host www or World Wide Web, and then the domain name itself, website.com. That's where you put adobe.com, ebay.com, etc. After that, backslashes and indicate a path. Now this path is really the same as the path you would see in your folder structure on your computer. In fact, it is exactly the same type of path. The last item on there is the actual file. In this case, webpage.html. Now that's a HTML document. There are many types of page or document types that websites can be made up of. This is a very common one, but you'll see quite a few things after that as well. But these are the basic URL components. That brings us to the internet browsers. Now, this is something you're probably familiar with to some degree. You cannot use the internet without really some sort of browser. So an internet browser is a type of software, an app, that allows a user to search and view web pages on the internet. As a matter of fact, if you actually knew the IP addresses of the servers and sites you're attempting to find, you could actually type those in, but they are incredibly complicated. That's why we have browsers. All the major web browsers have, of course, a mobile version nowadays for use on smartphones and tablets, although some web browsers are made for specific hardware platforms such as Apple products. Also, some browsers are now coming with different modes that actually hide your browsing activity from others that could see it on the internet. So the major internet browsers that we'll be mentioning, we have 5 of them. Google Chrome, of course, is probably one of the more popular ones, and the one that we are using for our labs in this class. There's also Microsoft Edge. I would like to note, too, that Microsoft Edge is replacing Microsoft Internet Explorer. Internet Explorer has been around for a very, very long time, and they finally wrote something from scratch. Actually, Internet Explorer had a lot of problems, and I can tell you for a fact it doesn't work right on most of our school software. The older Internet Explorer, the Microsoft Edge works fine. Also, there's Mozilla Firefox and Opera. Opera is well known for running on many different platforms, including older operating systems, and then the platform-specific Apple Safari browser as well. This concludes our presentation, Lecture 2, Browsing the Web. Please be sure to complete the quiz, and also the lab assignment has its own set of video instructions which you should be sure to watch first before you do the lab.